Hi everyone, this is Arcadius and welcome back to Naval Creed. Today we'll be going over the stats clash for the Tier 4 matchmaking carriers, the first ones we will see in the game, or at least at this tier, and we'll go over that in a moment, but before that there was an update this week, and we're going to go over some interesting developments in the update and also in World of Warship news on the Facebook page. So first things first, we have a new sister ship. This is for the, newest British battlecruiser, Renown. I've renamed it Courageous, considering that Repulse and Renown were the only two ships of this kind of branch off, and we already have those in the game. So I kind of have to come up with names by myself, which is fine. Courageous is pretty nice as a name, I think. And the camo, I'm not too much of a fan of it. There's a lot of colors, and they don't really seem to go together. It reminds me, honestly, of the sister ship for Akazuki, and I don't like that one either. So not the biggest fan, but at least we have another one. And then we have the first preview of the upcoming extended branch of American destroyers. Remember, this is from Gridley to Porter to Somers. So these are going to be mainly torpedo boats with a lot of guns, but probably slow shooting guns and not a lot of AA defense. So we can see Gridley. I've renamed it Benham because honestly I just like that name better. And it's going to be a new Tier 8 destroyer. And this is what she's going to look like. She's going to have 4 single 5-inch guns, just like Sims. However, she's going to have 16 torpedo tubes and 4 quadruple turrets, are torpedo mounts. And this is going to be a lot of torpedo power, without a doubt. If you've seen any games of Benham in World of Warships, you can understand how much of a torpedo threat she is. And she's going to be really good. Preliminary stats, you have pretty fast ship, 38.5 knots. Torpedoes, I can go out to about 10 kilometers, which is pretty decent. I mean, you have a 9.2, which are Mahan torps already. And then you have 10.0. I think Benson's do go farther, though. Let's see. 9.2 and no, 9.2. All right, so we already have torpedoes that go farther than Benson. The guns are going to be just normal 5-inch guns, nothing special there. It's going to be exact same kind of gun gameplay as Sims, I'm pretty sure. So nothing spectacular. Your torpedoes are good, but the rate of fire is going to be a slight problem. But honestly, if you can manage your torpedoes, you're going to be really, really good because you're fast as heck and you have a lot of torpedoes to boot. But your AA defense is pretty much nothing at all, as you can see here. So as predicted when we first received information about this ship, she's going to have good torpedoes, but everything else is pretty much going to be trash. But we'll see more once the ship actually is released, and hopefully we'll be able to look at Porter and Somers really soon as well. Alright, so that is pretty much everything from the update itself. Now let's go over to the Naval Creed news picture that I have here and talk about an upcoming ship that's possibly going to be released. Alright, and this is the ship. Now, supposedly it is a British cruiser, and all we have is a picture. There's no information about guns, stats, tier, no nothing. But what I can infer from just looking at the picture is that it looks to be the British super cruisers, how I describe them usually. So this is Azuma, Alaska, you have Lean, you have Kronstadt and Moskva. Those are all what I would call super cruisers. And it looks like we're going to get one for British as well. I'm not quite sure what caliber these guns are going to be, but I'm going to guess they're about 9-inch or 234 millimeter. That is my assumption. It looks like it has 3 quads, so you have 12 guns, which is actually really, really good. Is that the most out of any supercruiser? Yes, it is. In terms of number of guns, but not in caliber. You can have Lean and Kronstadt. They can both equip twin 15s, the German 15s. So it's not the biggest gun you can equip on a supercruiser if these are 9s, because Moskva has 9s as well. But they will be pretty powerful, I'm assuming. And you also have, it looks like, 4 twin 114s on the side. They look like daring guns. And then possibly some torpedoes in the back. It doesn't really show you at all, but it looks like you'll be able to have a aircraft as well in the amidships area. And then you kind of have like a vanguard kind of look with your superstructure. So that'll be very easy to burn. And she's very tall in the water, so she'll have really hard time giving broadside to anything. She'll be punished pretty easily for that. Um, but yeah, I think she might be a pretty good ship. She looks very long, but I also wonder if she'll be able to use the advanced, or the improved, I should say, maneuverability of British cruisers. They're very maneuverable, and I wonder if this one will also share that same trait. And this also might be a test bed for British heavy cruisers, because right now we only have light cruisers in the game, and even though the British Navy didn't have many heavy cruisers, it did at least have some, and you could probably come up with some designs to finish out the rest of the tech tree like they kind of did with the German battleships and such. But yeah, so maybe this is a test bed, or maybe it's a one-off thing. Regardless, this ship may be coming to the game. There's still a couple other ships that are still in limbo. For example, Hornet, we had that back in January, or about that time. We still haven't seen anything about that. There was that French carrier that was named Clemenza. It had the Crusaders on it, the V8 Crusaders. Still nothing about that. We are just now seeing information about the new American destroyers, but there's still two of those that we still have no information on whatsoever. And there's still a few ships that are out there in limbo, but now we have another one to look forward to. So hopefully this one will make its way to the game, because I'm actually quite excited to see how this works. And maybe she'll even keep the smoke screen that the British cruisers get. Super cruiser with a smoke screen would definitely be a game changer, I would say. All right, so that is it for all the extraneous information, I guess you could say. And now we're going to go over tier 4 carriers and just go all over the overall stats for the tier 4 ships. So let's switch over to that. All right, so for tier 4 carriers, we have 3 carriers to go over: Hosho, we have Langley, and we have Hermes. Now, out of all 3 of these, I'm going to say Hermes is my favorite, because you have good aircraft and your ship is good as well. Hosho, your aircraft are good, but your ship is not. And then Langley, your aircraft suck, and so does your ship. So you have a little bit of everything in Hermes, and honestly, she's one of my favorite carriers. I'm not a really big carrier person, but if I'm feeling an active for a game to play, I usually go to Hermes or Kaga or something like that. All right, so let's go over gameplay, just a general gameplay for all these ships. So Hosho, you have a fast carrier, and your torpedo bombers are going to be very, very strong. Your fighters, not so much, and you don't even have any dive bombers, so you don't have to worry about that. Langley, your ship is the slowest ship in the game. Yeah, that's right, in the game, not just at this tier. You have pretty decent fighters, and on paper your torpedo bombers are decent damage-wise, but they are so slow it doesn't even matter. And then your dive bombers, your accuracy is pretty much nothing. I struggle to hit anything with these dive bombers at all. So your offensive capability is pretty much nothing, but your defensive fighter capability is pretty decent. I will give her that. And then the ship itself actually has a lot of extra room in the middle. You can see right under the deck. There's just a bunch of supports, but no actual ship, and shells can actually go right through there. So if your enemy's not shooting the actual ship itself, it'll just go right through and not do any damage. That's kind of a interesting thing for the ship specifically. And then Hermes. We have a little bit of everything. British carriers themselves are going to be best if you build them as a survivability build. They have, well, this one has torpedo damage resistance, has pretty good armor, has really good AA, and you have decent fighters, not as good as American, but better than Japan. And your torpedo bombers and dive bombers kind of run the middle offensively and defensively, but nothing to be ashamed about. And then you even have enough secondaries to go brawling yourself, and speed to keep up with pretty much a lot of ships, not all of them. So yeah, you can clearly see I have a favorite, and that will be Hermes. But let's go over all of these carriers together. Right, so let's start with health. So Hermes has the most at 36,000, Hosho has the least at 31,800, and Langley's in the middle. Only Hermes has a torpedo damage reduction of 10%, the other two do not. Belt armor, Hosho and Langley don't have anything. You can citadel them with HE. Hermes at least has about 3 inches of belt armor. I haven't really come across Hermes in a game without playing a Hermes myself, so I can't really give any information about how she is against surface ships. But I mean, 3 inches is not a lot, so you probably could still be citadeled relatively easily. In terms of maneuverability, Hermes does have the worst turning circle radius of 700 meters. Langley has the least of 650, and then Hosho's kind of high at 680 as well. The only reason Langley has a good turning circle radius, though, is because she has a speed of 15 knots. That is right, 15 knots. Even battleships can run away from you and catch you if they're chasing you. And then Hosho and Hermes are about 25 knots. Not the fastest in the game by any means, or at this tier, but definitely faster than Langley at 15 knots. You're actually even faster than a cruiser. Ninghai, 23 knots. You cannot run a cruiser. Surface detectability, Hosho is pretty stealthy at 8.8 kilometers. Hermes is the least at 10.3, but that makes sense considering she has a giant tower at the top. And then air detectability, Langley is actually the most concealed at an air detectability at 7.4, and then Hosho and Hermes are the same at 8 kilometers. Considering we're talking about carriers, air detectability is actually quite important. Alright, next. We don't have any main guns. There's not a single carrier in this game that actually has main guns. All you have is different levels of secondaries. So for Hosho, we have 4 secondaries, 2 to a side. 140mm guns or 5.4 inch. They fire high explosive and shoot out to a range of 3.5 kilometers. You can't actually find these stats in the numbers or the diagram on the Naval Creed page, but if you actually play a game and you're able to lock onto a target, that's the secondary range. So at that point, I was able to figure out that it's 3.5 for Hosho and Langley. Langley, mind you, also has 4 single secondary guns of 4-inch caliber or 102mm that fire HE. They've also fired to 3.5 kilometers. And then Hermes, I thought they were all the same caliber. Turns out there is a difference, and also for future reference, I do apologize for all the mistakes I have in my notes for this week's Stats Clash. There was a lot of things that I miscounted or misread. I did the best I could. All right, so going back to Hermes, she has 6 guns on the hull that are 140mm or 5.4 inch. They fire high explosive. She also has 3 secondaries on the deck in front of around the tower of 4-inch caliber that also fire high explosive. They have the same range. There's no difference there, and that is 5 kilometers, which is better than every battleship at this tier. I think we have 4.6, 4.4, and 4.0 for battleship secondary ranges. So you can out secondary range or brawl a battleship. Not that I would recommend it in any way. Alright, that brings us to anti-aircraft defense. Now carriers do have an defensive AA consumable, and that will multiply your total AA defense by what I'm assuming is half or 200%, and that's for a certain amount of time. I don't have any numbers to confirm or deny that, but that's what I'm just going to use because that makes sense to me. Alright, so Hosho has 6 AA guns at 3.1 kilometers that do 19 damage total. Def AA does 38 damage. Langley has 20 AA guns, has 37 DPS at 1.1 or 1.2 kilometers, and then at 3.5 we have 7 for a total of 44 AA DPS, and when Def AA is activated, 88. And then Hermes has 9 guns with 48 total AA and 96 defensive AA DPS. So you can kind of see how Langley and Hermes are better suited for anti-aircraft defense when they're coming under attack. Hosho, it doesn't matter what you do, you're not going to really do anything defensively. You don't have armor, you don't have AA, you don't have enough secondaries to be useful. All you have are your torpedo bombers, and that's pretty much how you're going to play all Japanese carriers. Next is Consumables. So Hosho has a damage control party that lasts 5 seconds, Hermes lasts 10, and Langley lasts 15. So you can kind of see how Langley actually has a better survivability in terms of damage control party. Cooldown, however, Hosho and Hermes have the longest of 70 seconds. Langley has the shortest of 60 seconds. Not much, but it's still 10 seconds. And they have unlimited charges. And then all three have the defensive AA, a consumable that lasts 120 seconds. That's right, 2 minutes for this defensive AA. But you only get one of them. So the cooldown is irrelevant of 3 minutes or so. Not even more. I don't know. Regardless, you have one use of it, so you kind of have to wait until you're covered in aircraft, and then you pop it and they all start falling out of the sky. Or at least for Langley and Hermes. Hosho, probably not, because you don't have a lot of AA to begin with. Alright, so these are the aircraft layouts for these ships. Hosho can only have one layout, Langley can only have one layout, but Hermes can have two. So in terms of aircraft, Hosho and Hermes only have 24 aircraft. Langley has 30 planes, so she has the most, even though she's pretty small. Hosho has a fighter squadron and 2 torpedo bomber squadrons with no dive bombers. Langley has a fighter squadron, a torpedo bomber squadron, and a dive bomber squadron, and Hermes, both layouts, also have one of each. Total number of aircraft, Hosho has 8 fighters total, Langley has 12, and Hermes has 8. Torpedo bombers, Hosho has 16, Langley has 12, and Hermes has 8. And then dive bombers, Hosho has none, Langley has 6, and Hermes has 8 as well. So Hermes is pretty much the middle field. You don't have the most of anything unless you're counting dive bombers, but you have a little bit of everything. Langley is focused on torpedo bombers and fighters, and then Hosho is pretty much just focused on torpedo bombers. In terms of squadrons, Hosho has a fighter squadron that has 4 aircraft, and a torpedo bomber squadron that has 4 aircraft as well. You have 2 of those, that's why there's an 8 there. Langley has a fighter squadron of 6 aircraft, torpedo bomber squadron of 6 aircraft, and a dive bomber squadron of 3 aircraft. And then the first layout for Hermes is 4 aircraft for each type, and then the second layout has 5 aircraft for each type. The only difference is that you still have the same number of aircraft, you just have less as a reserve. For the first set, you have 4 aircraft in reserve, and then for the second layout for Hermes, you have 3 aircraft in reserve. But you still have the same total amount. It's just if you lose a squadron in the second set, you only have 3 as a backup, whereas you lose a squadron in the first set, you have 4 as a backup. So you don't lose them all. Alright, so let's go over the fighters themselves. So ranking, I'm not quite sure how this really entails to the game, but Hosho does have rank 5 fighters, while the others have rank 4. Health-wise, Hosho actually has the healthiest, or the strongest, well, I shouldn't say strongest, the fighters with the most health, I should say. So 990, and then Langley has the least at 880, and then Hermes is in the middle. That being said, though, Hosho and the first set of Hermes only have 4 planes, so they have pretty low squad health. So this is the total amount of health for all the planes in one squadron. Langley, even though she has the least amount of health per fighter, she has 6 fighters in one squadron, which is the most at this tier. So she actually has the highest squadron health. And then the second setup for Hermes, which has 5 planes, is somewhere in the middle. In terms of speed, however, Langley's planes are the slowest at 142 knots. Hosho is the fastest at 154 knots, but Hermes are not far behind at 152. Ammo count, Langley has 590 ammo per plane, and Hosho has 390, and Hermes also has 400. So you can kind of see how Langley is set up for a fighter-based gameplay. You have the most squadron health, and you have the most ammo. However, you're balanced by having the slowest speed and also the lowest kill percent of 48%, where Hosho, even though she has good health on her planes, low squadron health, fast speed, low ammo, but high kill percent. So it goes up and down depending on which stat you're looking at. And then the British are right in the middle. About 54% kill efficiency and pretty decent ammo, pretty good speed, and pretty good health as well. That's why I just love British, you can switch roles. Either you can be offensive or you can be defensive, and you're going to be really good in either way. And that was for the fighters. Torpedo bombers are a little bit different. Hosho, well, all of the torpedo bombers have a ranking of 4. Health-wise, Langley's have the least amount, but you also get 6 torpedo bombers in a squadron, so you technically have the largest squadron health. Hosho has the middle health of 840, but with only 4 planes, you have 3360 for squadron health. And then Hermes actually has the healthiest torpedo bombers of 860, and that gives you pretty decent squadron health as well. In terms of speed, Langley's are the slowest at 97 knots only, and then Hermes and Hosho following at 112 and 115. That's speed with the torpedo. Now, the speed of the aircraft actually changes once that torpedo is launched. So for Hosho, you actually get all the way up to 144 knots after you drop the torpedo. Langley, you go up to 121, and then Hermes, you actually go to 158, which is faster than the fighters. So if you're trying to escape fighters, you can drop your torpedoes and then run away, and they won't be able to catch you. Now, single torpedo damage, Hosho has the strongest torpedoes, or airdrop torpedoes, of 8,000 damage. Langley is just under that at 7,500, and then Hermes has 7,000. For squadron torpedo damage, that equates to Langley having the highest per squadron of 45,000 potential damage, if all 6 torpedoes hit and do maximum damage. This isn't including torpedo resistance. And then we have Hermes, the second layout, with 35,000, Hosho's of 32,000, and then the first layout for Hermes of 28,000. Now, Hosho actually has more than that. Remember, she has 2 squadrons of torpedo bombers, so her technical alpha is 64,000 damage for torpedoes, which is quite a bit more than, for example, Hermes' first set of 28,000. Torpedo speed, they're all going to be pretty slow. However, Langley does have the slowest of 33 knots, and Hermes has the fastest of 40 knots, and Hosho has the middle of about 37. Torpedo range, you're not going to get a lot of range with torpedoes, at least on carriers. Hosho is the largest, or the farthest, at 3.4, and Langley's 3.2, and Hermes 1 and Hermes 2 both have 3.0. It's not a lot of difference, and honestly, at the ranges I drop my torpedoes at, it's irrelevant, because the closer you can hit or drop to a target, the less time the target has to maneuver. Now, I don't know arming distances for these ships or these torpedoes. I'd like to think that it differs between different ships and different countries, or we don't have that information, so I can't really say. And then torpedo flood chance, Hosho has a 54% chance to flood, Langley has only 45, and then Hermes actually has 56. So not only does Hermes get good AA and armor and speed, pretty decent fighters, torpedo bombers, and, well, we'll get to the dive bombers in a moment, but it just has a good mix of everything that you need without focusing on one or the other. So, for example, Langley focuses on defensive capabilities such as AA and fighters, but lacks really in the offensive capability. She only has her torpedo bombers, which are really slow. And Hosho doesn't have a lot of defensive capability. It has a lot of offensive capability in terms of torpedo bombers, but no AA, no secondaries, no nothing. So you can kind of get an idea of their playstyle right off the bat. And then let's just finish up with the dive bombers. Hosho doesn't have any at all. Langley only has a squadron of 3, which are rank 3, so they're already trash. 640 health per plane, which is really, really bad. Squadron health is only 1920. The speed is slow at 110 knots. Max speed of 138 as soon as you drop the bomb. Bomb damage is 5400 singularity. Squadron bomb damage is 16,200 and 110% chance of fire. And then Hermes, you have a tier 4 planes that have 960 health, which is a lot more than 640. And you can have 4 planes, or you can have 5 planes in a squadron instead of 3. Their speed with the bomb is 114 knots, and speed as soon as you drop goes all the way up to 158, which will still be able to outrun fighters. And bomb damage is the same, with a bomb alpha for the second set of 37,500. So really good there as well. And you have a 122% chance of fire. So dive bombers are pretty substantial as well. So for actually alphas, Hosho has torpedo alpha, or the highest torpedo alpha of 64,000. And then Hermes' second layout has the best bomb alpha of 37,500. So yeah, pretty decent ships altogether. Not going to complain about them except Langley, but it's hard to compare and complain about them because they each have their own separate playstyles, and you can't really compare different playstyles. All right, and then this is the list of ships that these can sink with just their torpedoes. So for the torpedo alphas, Hosho has 64,000, Langley 45, Hermes 1 28,000, and then Hermes 2 35. So you can sink all destroyers. The first set of Hermes cannot actually sink Krasny Kavkaz. It just misses it, as you can see. And then only Hosho is able to take down Kaiser and Gangut, and nobody is able to take down Queen Mary. She just has so much health and the highest torpedo damage resistance at this tier. It's pretty much impossible to sink this ship. And then in terms of carrier versus carrier, Hosho and Langley can sink them with torpedoes. Hermes' first set cannot. And then Hermes' second set can only sink Hosho and Langley, but not Hermes herself. So pretty much focused on destroyers and cruisers and the occasional carrier. You can obviously finish that up with dive bombers. I don't have any comparisons for dive bombers here because even if you land all of your bomb hits, there's a good chance you're not going to do all maximum damage. So it's really hard to say, oh yeah, if I dive bomb this destroyer with my Hermes dive bombers, it'll immediately get one-shotted because it's doing enough damage to completely negate the health. But in reality, in the gameplay, you don't really see that. All right, so that does finish up the stats comparison for Tier 4 matchmaking carriers. So let's just give a brief overview. So Hosho, you have speed, but you lack armor. You don't have secondaries, or not many. Your AA is pitiful, but you have good offensive capability in terms of torpedo bombers. But you do not have any dive bombers, and your fighters, on paper they look okay, but in game they're actually not that good. So you're a purely offensive carrier. Langley, you are the slowest ship in the game. You're maneuverable, but you don't have good dive bombers. Your torpedo bombers are manageable, but pretty slow and hard to use. And your fighters are really good, actually, and so is your Aaa Defense. So you're pretty much defensive. And then lastly, we have Hermes, which has the ability to brawl if need be with good armor, good secondaries. She can defend herself with good AA and fighters, and she has good offensive capability as well with good torpedo bombers and the best dive bombers at this tier as well. So you have a little bit of everything in terms of Hermes, and that's why I like her the most. But that doesn't mean she's the best. Like I said, you can obviously do a lot of damage with Hosho with her torpedo bombers, and then Langley, if you're under air attack, you're pretty much going to be invulnerable if you have your fighters and AA and defensive AA. So in terms of air attack, Langley is the best, but in terms of surface attack for Langley, she's the worst because you will not outrun a single ship. All right, so enough with the carriers. Let's go over the stats comparison for all Tier 4 matchmaking ships. And we're going to start off with health-wise. So I tried to color code it so you'll be able to tell the ships apart, or at least the classes. So in terms of health, the battleships are at the top, not surprisingly, but then we have all three of the carriers, then the cruisers, and then the destroyers. So Queen Mary has the most health at 52,300, and Clemson is at the bottom of 10,600. We're going to see Clemson at the bottom a lot, so just get used to that. But Queen Mary has the most health for the battleships, Hermes has the most for the carriers, Krasny Kavkaz has the most for the cruisers, and Kamikaze has the most for the destroyers. In terms of speed, most of the destroyers are at the top. Only Valkyrie is not. Yubari and Kuma actually go faster than that British destroyer. And then we have a few more cruisers, then Queen Mary, more cruisers, couple carriers. The Hosho and Hermes, like I said, do go faster than Ninghai. And then Ninghai, Kaiser, and Ganga all go 23 knots. And then Langley's at the bottom at a snailish 15 knots. In terms of maximum gun range, the carriers will not be in this one because they don't have main guns. But again, we have the battleships at the top, with Queen Mary having the farthest range of 16.8 kilometers. The cruisers in the middle, Krasny Kavkaz, having the most range at 13.7 kilometers. And then the destroyers at the bottom, with Valkyrie at the top at 9.2 kilometers. Valkyrie's a very good little gunboat, but she's not the fastest or the best ship for torpedoes. She's just mainly AA and guns, which is actually really important at this tier. Next, we move over to HE Alpha and AP Alpha. Again, the battleships are going to be at the top, the cruisers in the middle, and the destroyers at the bottom. Gangut's going to be at the top no matter what because of the number of guns she has. But Queen Mary and Kaiser do actually flip-flop in terms of HE and AP Alpha there. Omaha, surprisingly, has the best HE Alpha and AP Alpha of all the cruisers, followed by Königsberg. Omaha's not really known for her guns. She's pretty much just a floating citadel, but on paper, she does have really, really good guns. Königsberg as well. And then for HE Alpha, Caledon is actually pretty high up there as well. And then you have the Japanese cruisers, Kavkaz, and then the Karlsruhe and Yubari. Not a big surprise there. And then just the destroyers at the bottom. Clemson, again at the bottom. In terms of AP, Krasny Kavkaz actually does pretty decent, even with only 4 guns, though they are 7-inch guns. Then you have Karlsruhe, Caledon, Kuma, Sendai, Ninghai, and Yubari. And then the destroyers with Clemson at the bottom again. Then we have Aaa Defense. So the first column on the left is Aaa Defense, just the normal stats. The second column is the AA stats when the ships that can use it are using the defensive AA consumable. So this is all the carriers, and then you also have Sendai, you have Krasny Kavkaz, and I think that's the only cruisers that can use it. I'm not entirely sure. But regardless, for the first column, Gangut has the best AA or base AA of 76 DPS, followed by Kaiser, Omaha, Kavkaz, and Ninghai. And then pretty much anything after, well, Langley is pretty much worthless. Valkyrie, Yubari, and Sendai do have pretty high numbers, but it's still not enough to really make a difference. And then everything below that, it doesn't matter. You're not going to do anything. For when you're using defensive AA, Krasny Kavkaz actually has the best AA at this tier of 110 DPS, followed by the couple carriers with really good AA defense. And then Gangut actually has better AA defense than Sendai when Sendai is using her defensive AA consumable. So, yeah, Gangut has really good AA defense. And then you have Kaiser, Omaha, Ninghai, and then pretty much everything below Ninghai is trash. Even Hosho, when she's using a defensive AA consumable, has about the same AA as a Valkyrie. So there's nothing really special there. You will knock down some planes, like 4 or 5, but not enough to really make a difference. But maybe you will be able to take down a squadron, and you don't really have a lot of aircraft at this tier. So maybe one squadron is all you really need to make or shoot down to make a game changer. It really depends on what the game is. And then anything below that's pretty much trash. In terms of Torpedo Broadside, we have Yubari at the top of 120,000 possible damage. And then you take a giant step backward to Königsberg at 81,000. So the cruisers are actually at the top of the torpedo power here. And then we have the second set of Clemson torpedoes, then Hosho. Remember, she has the 2 squadrons of torpedo bombers, another cruiser, and then the destroyers. So the destroyers don't have the best torpedoes, or broadside, I should say. The cruisers and the carrier, or a carrier, is going to have that award. And then everything falls down. As you can see, it's a mix of cruisers, destroyers, and carriers. And then all the way down to the bottom, we have Ninghai of 16,000. We actually have the first set of Hermes torpedo bombers, second from the bottom at 28,000. So you're not really doing a lot of damage there either. And then lastly, we're going to go over Concealment. So for surface detectability, the destroyers are going to be the stealthiest, which is not really that surprising. And then the battleships are the least stealthiest, which also makes sense. And then in the middle, we have a mix of carriers and cruisers. Ninghai is actually pretty stealthy as well. She wants to be. She has the armament of a destroyer, but she has the speed of a battleship, and it doesn't really work out for her at this tier. In the previous tier, at tier 3, she was somewhat okay, but really not. But here she just suffers even more. Omaha is actually pretty high detectability, the most of any of the cruisers. So yes, she does have really good alpha damage and speed, but in terms of detectability, you're going to be one of the first ships seen and shot at, and you don't really have the armor to deal with that. In terms of air detectability, as we just talked about carriers, it is important. Clemson is the stealthiest at 3.0 kilometers, which is the only real place she's pretty decent. Her torpedoes and concealment, at least in terms of air detectability, it is pretty decent. And then we have the rest of the destroyers, all of the cruisers in one group there, then the carriers, and then lastly the battleships. With Gangut being the worst in terms of surface detectability and air detectability. So, as a final rundown on Tier 4 ships, you have pretty fast and deadly destroyers. We are starting to see some differential gameplay. So, the Japanese, Chinese, and Japanese destroyers are pretty much torpedo-based gameplay. But Valkyrie does have her merits in terms of Aaa Defense and gunfire and consumables. Cruiser-wise, we kind of see some older cruisers such as Caledon and Karlsruhe that have pretty slow rate of fire but pretty decent guns that hit hard. But we also have Omaha and Königsberg, which are rapid firing guns. In terms of carriers, these are the first carriers we see. There's a mix of offensive and defensive gameplay, but there's not really a lot of planes in the air yet, but there's also not a lot of AA guns on ships yet either, so they can't send many aircraft out, but you can't really shoot them down either. So it's a stalemate where they're just dropping torpedoes and bombs on you, but not with a lot of accuracy. And then lastly, battleships. We have a mix of brawling and sniping kind of ships between slower ships and faster battle cruisers as well. So you get a little bit of everything, and you can kind of decide which works best for you. Are you someone who likes fast ships that are somewhat stealthy and can actually get themselves out of a fight? Or do you want to stay back and just launch aircraft and let the aircraft do the work for you? Or do you want to brawl with a large battleship and do as much damage as possibly can? The options are endless, and honestly, Tier 4 is a pretty decent tier in terms of variability. Tiers are going to be fun if there's differences you can play. You don't want just the same thing over and over again. Like the higher tiers, you're going to have fast ships with good guns, good AA, and good torpedoes, and good speed, and the same armor. And it's just going to be like a copy paste no matter what you look at. Now, obviously, there's going to be differences, but not enough to really make one or the other a really good choice. With these lower tiers, you have one or the other, and that's what makes them special. Now, I don't really like tier 4 all that much. I'm more of a tier 5, 6, 7, and 8 kind of person, but it's pretty decent as well. All right, and with that, we will wrap up all tier 4 comparisons. And as mentioned, this was mainly for the carriers, so let's just do one last review on those. Hosho is offensive based, but don't expect her to be any helpful in terms of defensive capability. Langley, slow ship in the game, but you do have pretty decent you have offensive capability and good defensive capability. And then lastly, Hermes is in the middle, with she can pretty much do anything. With that, I will wrap up today's video. If you liked the video, make sure you like and subscribe for further content. And join me tomorrow, well, not tomorrow, in a couple days, since it is now Monday, with the newest update. Hopefully, we'll get some new goodies, maybe some more information in terms of that British supercruiser, and maybe the French carrier and the other American carrier as well. Who knows? A lot of stuff on the back burner, a lot of stuff to look forward to, maybe some American destroyer information as well. We'll see. So, again, thank you for watching and take care.